Hello. In my previous video, I mentioned that the first store I began playing EDH in was a major outlier compared to the other ones I currently visit. I had some very strange games and magic in this store, and I want to go through a couple of examples that I think were interesting and perhaps illustrative when we think about what makes for a good EDH experience. To give some context, this store hosted a number of events for a wide variety of games, but the one I participated in regularly was their weekly Commander Night. This event ran from about 5 PM through till 10, and I used to attend each week after work as my primary way of playing paper Magic. Unlike more casual Commander Nights, this event was structured as a tournament. You would have 3 games across 3 pods, and you would be seeded based on how well you did in each game. There were some prizes involved, but everyone who took part got a booster pack. But the better you did, the more you would get, mostly promos and additional packs. Now, despite this setup, the event wasn't entirely competitive in nature. Many people showed up to play casually. I started going here because it was the first Magic event I was aware of, so when I began, I was playing precons. Quite a lot of people attended. I think the most I saw on one night was 25, but you would at least get a good 16 to 17 people attending each night. The point is, there was a wide skill range across the group. Decks were varied and would range from your precons through to some very expensive and fancy decks. For the most part, this wasn't an issue. You would be matched up in pods at random for the first game, and inevitably those who were less skilled or who were playing janky, fun decks would lose, and they would play their second and third games against people who were playing similar decks. Likewise, those who are truly here to compete would win, and they would find themselves playing against like-minded people. I had some very enjoyable games here, but I do think the structure of this event incentivized some pretty unwelcoming behaviour. It could often spoil what had otherwise been a pleasant evening. The first example I want to highlight involves dishonesty and expectations, and exploiting those to gain an advantage. So one night I attended, I had done quite well with my first pod. I can't quite remember if I had placed first or second, but at the time I was trying out a budget deck I had recently built, and everything seemed to be going pretty well at the time. I was matched against players who had similarly done well in their games. Right away, one of them announced that they desperately needed to head home, so it would be a 3-player game. We sat down to begin. Now, despite the semi-competitive nature of this event, people would still have that initial Rule Zero discussion about what they were going to play. People weren't going into this blind, nobody was pulling out decks and surprising each other. There was still that discussion about what people would actually be playing in the game. I told the others that I'd brought with me a couple of precons and my budget deck, and I would likely play the budget deck. One of the other players, let's call him John, he told us that he'd only brought one deck with him. He said it was a very strong deck, but we could have a quick game and then move on. I was perfectly fine with this. I don't mind potentially losing to a stronger deck. After all, losing is fun. In retrospect, I could have offered him to use one of my precons, but it didn't occur to me at the time. I was just happy to be playing, so I told him I was fine with it. He emphasised that he felt his deck was very, very strong, and I did appreciate that from him. I was still very new to the game, most commanders were just mysteries to me still, so when someone would say, "Is it okay if I play my Grand Arbiter deck?" or whatever else, I would just nod and say okay, because it's not like I knew what these decks did, and it would at the very least be interesting to find out. Funnily enough, I can't actually remember what the commander was, but I took John at his word that it was a very strong deck with an all-powerful commander that could easily win as early as turn 3. The other player, we'll call him Jim, he told us he had a few different decks with him, but the one he wanted to play was his upgraded precon. It was a recent release, he switched a few cards around, and although it wasn't amazing, he'd still like to give it a go, and he didn't mind playing against stronger decks. So we rolled off to see who would go first, and drew our initial hands. I didn't have anything great, but I did have some early interaction. John plays a fetch land and passes, I play an island, and Jim plays a land of his own. Second round, John plays another fetch, drops some fancy artifact, then passes. I play my second island, and then we go to round 3. Now, I had 2 open islands. I'd taken everything John had said on board. I knew his deck was supposedly strong, but I did want to try and eventually play my own commander. So on turn 3, John goes to play his commander, and in the most telegraphed move in history, I counterspelled it. Honestly, I have never seen someone look so frustrated in their entire life. Immediately, I was asked why I did that, what was I trying to do, why was I targeting him, and I mean look, it's not fun to build a strategy around your commander and then have the guy opposite tell you no. You can't do your funny combo just yet. But I think the rationale was pretty obvious. I tried to explain myself. I don't think he was happy with my explanation, but he didn't have anything else he could do, so he passed. I played a creature, developed my board a bit, and then I passed. And that's when Jim says, I'll play another land, play this Rhystic Study, then pass. I don't want to get too bogged down in the details, but it's fair to say that Jim's upgraded precon was an upgraded precon in the same way that a train is an upgraded bicycle. They both have wheels and they both transport people, but aside from some surface level similarities, there was a pretty wide gulf between the two. Very quickly, Jim ran away with the game and followed up his Ristic studies with many other powerful staple cards. John basically never recovered from having his commander counterspelled. All things considered, it was a pretty miserable game of Magic. As I said earlier, I don't mind losing, but I don't appreciate the misrepresentation. If you have a powerful deck and you want to play it, then that's fine by me, but don't pretend that it isn't powerful. Likewise, if you tell people you have a powerful deck built around a powerful commander, I think you should be prepared to have people interact with your game plan. I'm not in the habit of counterspelling commanders generally speaking, but given the circumstances, I think that you should be prepared for the possibility. Maybe that means you wait before dropping your commander, or try and bait out the obvious counterspell. Who knows? I think there is a lot to reflect on here, and I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on this in the comments. Now, this isn't representative of every game I played at this store, but I did have a few experiences along these lines where people would intentionally downplay or mislead about what their decks did, and I feel that they were encouraged to do so because ultimately it worked. Not only that, but there was a clear incentive to do it. If people think you are weak, they are less likely to target you. I actually had some of my best results at this store playing precons. I would never win, but it wasn't uncommon to come second. The reason was simple. You were incentivized to take out the strongest threats first, and typically, that isn't going to be the guy playing his first ever commander deck. Now, there was one other game that I wanted to discuss in this video, mostly because I'd be interested in hearing what people's thoughts on this are. Unlike the previous game, I don't think there's an obvious point to it, but it was definitely an interesting game, and that's really why I want to talk about it. This other game actually occurred when I'd only been playing EDH for a few weeks or so. Through dint of luck, I'd managed to make my way to the highest level table one night with nothing but my Bloomborough precon. By the way, I know the older precons are something of a bad reputation, but I actually really enjoyed playing with a couple of Bloomborough ones I had. I can't really compare them to what came before because I lacked that experience, but I did just really enjoy playing them, and I feel pretty similarly about the Dustmourn ones as well. Getting back to the point, with my precon I had actually managed to get to the top part of the tournament structure for the first time, and I was feeling pretty happy with the result. No expectations of winning, and I was looking forward to what I was hoping would be an interesting game of Magic, and it was certainly an interesting game. Bound to begin. I was in a pod with 3 other players this time. Let's call them Bill, Ben and Bob. I let them know I am playing a precon, and I don't really mind what they play. It's clear, by the way, that Bill and Ben know each other. They're good friends, they obviously play together quite a bit. Bill tells us that he wants to play his Winota deck. He'll happily play something else if we mind, but he wanted to give it a whirl. I say yes because the commander didn't mean anything to me anyway. I'd never heard of Winota up until this point. I didn't know what it does. I know what it does now, but at this time it was totally new to me. That's when Ben said something along the lines of, "Hey, you shared your deck list with me before, and I'd actually built my own Winota deck with it as well, so I think I'll also play Winota." Now I'm fine with this, and everyone else is basically fine with this. Bob tells us that he wants to play his Krenko deck. With all that out of the way, we rolled off to see who would go first. This game got off to a pretty weird start. My hand was very slow, but that is a given with the nature of precons, so I slowly built up my board state while the other 3 players went at it with each other. Now Bill and Ben had pretty quickly realised that I wasn't exactly the threat here, so it was like they had decided they were going to team up against the poor sod playing Krenko. When he tried to play Krenko, it would get destroyed. If he tried to play anything else, it would get removed. He was practically playing 2 against 1. I was sitting in the corner and having very little impact on anything that was happening, while Bill and Ben effectively teamed up to make Bob miserable. I don't think Krenko accomplished anything throughout all of this. At no point during the course of what was a very long game did Krenko actually get to create his signature horde of goblins. Eventually Bob announces that he can't do anything, that he is fed up, and that he quits. At this point, one of the pair tells us that he's gotten his infinite combat combo assemble, and now he is going to wipe out everyone else. That's when the other guy piped in that his combo was also ready, and he had interaction ready to stop the other combo as well. I sat there for what felt like an hour while Bill and Ben tried to work out which of them was the winner. I pretty quickly zoned out while the pair tried to maneuver around each other and figure out who was the real winner of the match. I couldn't begin to describe the board state here because I was frankly exhausted and I just wanted the match to end so I could collect whatever it was I'd won and leave. Eventually, one of them triumphed over the other. I had incidentally been wiped out and came third, and the whole thing came to a close. Bob was very clearly upset with the whole thing. He was not happy that they had effectively teamed up against him and that they were playing exactly the same deck as each other. I had just been sitting there, looking and feeling clueless, and it's really just one of those matches that I'll never forget. Again, I'm not sure that there is a deeper moral point to any of this. Of all the games of Magic I played, it's just really stuck with me. Eventually, I would stop visiting this LGS. I found out another place was hosting its own event and I didn't want to go to 2 events in 1 week, so I switched over to the other place. The new LGS ran it casual, people finding like-minded people in the store to play with each other as and when, without this heavily structured format hanging over the whole event. To be clear, I don't think having a structure like this is bad. Randomly assigning pods and then running a tournament guarantees that everyone would get to play at least 3 games. Nobody would feel left out, and those who did better would be rewarded for doing so. Ultimately, it just wasn't for me, but I still had a decent time there. Anyway, thank you for watching, and also for all those who watched my previous video. I wasn't sure that anybody would be interested in listening to me talking about Magic, so the last video really exceeded my expectations. Hopefully you enjoy this one as well, and if you do, please make sure to subscribe and like the video and I'll keep making more. While I was writing this script, they actually announced the beta for the new Commander bracket system, so maybe that's something that we could talk about next, but until then, thank you for watching, and see you later. Final note, before this I didn't really make videos along these lines, but I did stream a lot, and I do occasionally stream, so if you want to check that out, just head to www.twitch.tv/TrueLeveler, and you can watch me play Dwarf Fortress or whatever else it is I decide I'm going to stream.